Live from Fairfax, it's the Inside Scoop, Virginia. All the news Virginians want to know. Here's your host.
Welcome. I'm your host, Bettina Lawton. If you were expecting Dr. Sam, you need to check back next week. He is traipsing around Europe. So I'm here tonight, and I'm very pleased to say that our guest tonight is Senator Chap Petersen. We had Chap with us back in October before the election. He's obviously won re-election, otherwise I wouldn't be calling him Senator Chap Petersen here tonight. And he won with close to 60% of the vote on his first re-election to the Senate. So congratulations, first of all.
Thank you, Bettina. Thank you, and especially thank you to everybody who voted for me.
Absolutely.
I appreciate it.
And as those who saw our prior show knows, can't be me because I'm not in your district anymore, but that was great. Now let me ask you, because the Senate has been reorganized, did any of your committee assignments change? Are you still on the same ones, or how did that work?
Unfortunately, I'm not going to use the word victim, so I'll say recipient of a committee transfer, or to be blunt, I was dropped from the Courts of Justice Committee. I had 4 committee assignments: agriculture, privileges in elections, and general laws and technology. And then I also was on the Courts of Justice Committee, which was important because I was the only Northern Virginia attorney on the committee. And when we reorganized and the Republicans reshuffled the committees, I was dropped from Courts of Justice. So now I have 3 committees.
Okay. Did they put another attorney on Courts of Justice? Is that a requirement?
Well, they made it a Republican majority, and now it's, I believe, 8 Republicans, 7 Democrats. And unfortunately, of the 7 Democrats, 4 of them are not attorneys. And so as a result, I feel like we're a little bit shorthanded on that committee, not just in terms of numbers, but just also in terms of day-to-day practicing in the court system. So that was a disappointment because I really enjoyed that committee. I felt like I added something. We, among other things, interview all the judicial candidates. We change all the rules of evidence. So that was a change, and from my perspective, not for the better, but that's what happens in politics.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
And the concept of the Republican majority, that's the hotly disputed 2020. Right. There is no majority, but they took it anyway, right?
Right, yeah. All my life in legislative politics, you've always kind of struggled with what's the right proportion, because almost every legislative body has a rule which says each caucus has to be represented in proportion to its numbers. So if you had, for example, 60% Democratic, 40% Republican, you would then do 60-40 on the committees. And normally, for example, when I was in the House, the percentages were difficult to ascertain because you'd have 57-41-2,
right.
2 independents. So you'd always kind of struggle, what's the right proportion? Well, this year was easy. It was 20-20, so it would be 50-50. And in fact, from the Democratic caucus, we put forward a plan to have every committee be 8-8. And you might say, well, that's a recipe for gridlock. Well, actually, it's not. If you have the parties working together, and we've had this before, most legislation passes with bipartisan support, so frankly, it's a checks and balances. But that was rejected, and the Republicans put forward a plan, and when the lieutenant governor voted to break our tie, their plan was accepted, and we reorganized with the Democrats being in the minority, even though we had half the members.
Are any committees 50-50, or they're all heavily weighted to Republicans?
The committees are all weighted to the Republicans, with one exception, and that's the Local Government Committee, which has 10 Democrats and 6 Republicans. And local government is extremely important.
Right.
The Local Government Committee in Richmond is not extremely important. It tends to get bills which tend to be like charters for towns and cities and are non-controversial. So it's fair to say when the Democrats were in charge, we left the Republicans in charge of the Local Government Committee. So it tends to be a little bit of a non-indicator as to power.
Okay. I wondered about that.
Contra-indicator. Yeah.
I thought, well, gee, are more local governments controlled by Democrats?
Yeah.
Is that why they're still
Don't let the Local Government Committee fool you into thinking that's who controls local government. So.
Okay. So that didn't work out at all, and you all tried to sue. I remember there was a lawsuit, and that didn't go anywhere. Now you're in this situation for at least another year.
Right.
The lieutenant governor is the tiebreaker.
Right.
And at the moment, the lieutenant governor is Bowling, and who is a Republican.
Right.
Who wants to run for governor.
That's correct.
Do you think any of his behaviors this year were sort of geared towards that. We hear that a lot about McDonald took this position or that because he wants to be vice president.
Right.
Do you think that Lieutenant Governor Bowling was guided by his desire to become governor?
Bill Bowling ran for lieutenant governor, and I didn't follow his campaign closely, but I'm pretty confident he ran as a conservative, and so I don't think anyone can claim that he ran to be something else. And he's had a voting record that's pretty much been right down the line with the Republicans. So I might stand up and say, well, gee, that's not fair. He's supposed to be president of the Senate, but again, he ran on the Republican ticket,
right.
So I'm not going to say that he deceived anybody. There was a couple times where I thought maybe he would rule for us from a procedural or parliamentary point of view, but by and large, consistently, he was down the line with the Republicans. The one thing that he did indicate for us early on was that he could not vote on the budget, nor could he vote on judges. Well, not shockingly, the two things we never agreed on, one were judges and the second was a state budget, and that's why we're going back in a special session. And in a lot of ways, we, as Democrats, as the quote-unquote minority caucus, we have more leverage on those issues because the lieutenant governor can't break the tie. So in that situation, the Republicans did have to work with us because they couldn't just ram it down our throats.
But did they actually work with you guys? Because there is no budget.
Well, there's no budget right now, but ironically, this morning I was exchanging emails with Walter Stosh, who's the chairman of the Senate Finance Committee. He represents Henrico County. And there's two items that I very much want to get back into the budget. One is the cost of competing for Northern Virginia public schools, so our teachers and instructional personnel can get that extra supplement that you need to live in Northern Virginia. And that's about a $64 million cost to the state. Mm-hmm. And then secondly, the national bank settlement, which Virginia is slated to get $400 and some odd million. We took about $60 million of that and put it into the general fund as opposed to using that money to help homeowners who need to refinance and get into lower loans, homeowners who basically were victimized during the whole national bank scandal, the foreclosure scandal. And I emailed Walter over the weekend and said, we need to really focus on these two issues. And he responded right away and said, we're going to do the best we can. So, but at the end of the day, the Republicans need Democratic votes to pass the state budget, mm-hmm. and that puts us in a position to, frankly, leverage our position to help our constituents.
Has it ever been that the budget didn't pass? I know it's been delayed a number of times.
Right.
But have we ever gotten to that point where it never got done? And because I remember when the session was ending and the Republicans were saying, oh, the Democrats are terrible and we don't have a budget, we're
right.
going to have to shut down the state, and there was all of this sort of doom and gloom going on.
Right.
Has that ever happened? Do we have any precedent for that?
No. In 2004, when I was in the House of Delegates, we had what I referred to as the overtime session, where we went all the way into early May before we passed the budget. And that, I think, was a closer call because you had some significant philosophical differences as to whether or not we were going to do tax reform or whether or not we were going to basically vote no against every tax bill. And we ended up passing that budget, and that was in early May. Today is March 18th, and we still have 3.5 months, and I expect we will get a budget agreed, at least in principle, by late March. Now, we may need to do a couple pro forma votes in early April, but, if you're a state employee or a teacher, trust me, you're going to get paid. And so, there's always a lot of hyperbole in politics. I know you're mm-hmm. shocked to hear that.
I truly am.
You're shocked. But,
shocked.
But, no, we're going to take care of business. We will.
So we're not looking at like what happened in, I guess it was 95 in the federal government, where you had two parties that just stood where they were and nothing happened?
My understanding of what happened in 1995, and I was just out of law school, was that, again, the Republicans just, they shut down the federal government because they didn't believe in what it was doing. And on the other hand, as Democrats, I believe in what the state government does. I believe in teaching the kids. I believe in safe communities. I believe in the programs that we have to help the elderly, Medicaid, for example. So I'm not going to shut down a government which helps my constituents. I'm very proud of our state services. I'm proud of our state employees. I tell people all the time, you pay about 10 cents of every dollar you earn in state and local taxation in Virginia, And I don't think you can find a better deal in the United States for that 10 cents.
Well, there was a lot of headlines, a lot of talking that said this wasn't really about what's in the budget, because apparently, and I haven't seen it, apparently there was a letter sent that said, where the Democrats reportedly said, you need to split these committees evenly with us, we need to have a power sharing, and if you don't, you're not getting a budget. So in your mind, is it, I mean, that strikes a lot of people as just raw political power politics.
Right. Well, I think it's fair to say we had a number of parallel discussions going on at the same time. And the issue of power sharing underlies almost everything. Because without power, as Democrats, we can't stop anything. We can't stop the ultrasound bill. We can't stop a negative budget. We can't stop anything. So I think it's fair to say that power sharing has been a discussion, and it will be, because remember in 2013, if we win lieutenant governor, then we'll have the 21-20 advantage. But ironically, and I've told newspaper editors this, but none of them seem to understand, when we set our rules, we set them for 4 years. So the committees are actually locked in for 4 years. So even if Democrats take the majority by winning the lieutenant governor position, they would still be in the minority on all these committees, because it takes 2/3 of a vote to remove somebody from a committee. Now, for whatever reason, I've told the editors of the Washington Post this, they don't think it's worth writing an editorial about. But that's why this issue, to me, is much greater. I mean, as for my committee assignments, you can put me wherever, okay? But at the end of the day, I've got to represent my constituents, and for me to sort of willingly accept a lesser role when the voters in my district have asked me to step up, that in and of itself is selfishness. So the short answer is, Bettina, there were issues that were relevant to the budget. There were also issues that are relevant to power. But I'm not going to be disingenuous. Politics is all about power.
Right.
And if you step back and let the other person assume power, what are you doing there? You know, I mean, you got to fight. So in response to your question directly, there were issues that were unique to the budget, but power sharing has been something we've been discussing with the Republicans. What I'd like to see at some point is us, the Democrats, at least get control of a couple committees. And again, if we win back the lieutenant governorship in 2013 and don't have control of the committees, we have, you know, it's going to be a catastrophe.
Well, we're going to come back and talk some more with Senator Chap Petersen after the break. We've got a lot of bills we want to talk about, things that were important to him when he came to see us earlier, so stay with us. We'll be back.
Around the world, 1 out of every 3 women will be beaten or otherwise abused in their lifetime, often by a family member or loved one. A future free from violence. It's all she's ever wished for.
Did you know you have the power to stop children from joining gangs? You can help a father find a job and home for his family. You can assist a woman who can't afford the medicine she needs to live and the home she can't live without. You can choose to make a difference in our community. Support Volunteers of America, and you can help improve the lives of nearly 2 million Americans each year, with programs and services that help individuals and families overcome their challenges to become as independent as possible. Support the programs that are working in our community. Contact Volunteers of America today. Call 1-800-899-0089.
For some folks, saving for the future is easy, but for you, it might take a little more effort. Saving for your future is your responsibility, and there's a lot to save for.
I never thought of that.
Like your child's education, perhaps uncovered medical expenses, or just to be sure you can live the way you want when you retire. The time is now to save for tomorrow. Save now or work forever. The choice is yours. Choose to save.
Here again, the Inside Scoop, Virginia.
I'm Bettina Lawton, the host of Inside Scoop Virginia, and tonight we have Senator Chap Petersen. We're talking about what went on down at the Senate. We've still got more to go because the budget hasn't been done yet. So when we left, we were talking about what happens with the state of the Senate. And it's currently got 20 Republicans and 20 Democrats, but they didn't exactly organize that way. And so what happens? When we were off, we were talking about the lieutenant governor comes up for election next year, along with the governor and the attorney general and the entire House of Delegates. But none of the senators come up for next year, right?
That's right.
So we could end up with an evenly split Senate and instead a Democratic lieutenant governor.
That's right.
But the committee assignments all stay the same.
Right. The committee assignments, when we pass them, they're for 4 years. So people are locked in for 4 years, which means Democrats would be locked into the minority for 4 years, even if they recapture the lieutenant governor. And I think that is the aspect of the what I call the sort of the opening day massacre that no one seized on. The media almost completely failed to recognize that again, we're locked into a minority even if we actually take the majority.
So did it used to be that way, or is that a rule change that locked it in for 4 years?
It's always been that way, that when you elect the committees, they're elected for 4 years. That's always been part of our operating rules. The only other time the Senate's been split 2020 was in 1995, and that was when the parties instituted power sharing, where they actually had co-chairs on the committees, they had equal numbers of people on the committees, and that's how the Senate operated for, I'm going to leave about 5 or 6 years. So there was ample precedent to do that again. And I got to be honest, I was actually surprised we did. I just assumed we would do that, and I was surprised we did not.
Well, it sort of gives lie to the notion of Virginia as sort of we operate as a gentlewoman club. I know there was a speech in the last week or two by one of the senators saying we need to get back to our traditional good ways of operating, and I understand from what I read in the paper that everybody stood up and applauded, and I thought, well, great, but that doesn't actually take us where we need to go.
Right. You know, it was a great speech. It was Chuck Colgan, who's served for 37 years in the Senate, which has got to be some type of world record. Yeah, everybody applauded, but nobody actually changed anything.
Did anything,
right,
exactly.
So.
Just the easy way to go.
Right.
Let me ask you about a couple of things.
Sure.
When you visited us back in October, you said one
right.
of the big things in your district when you were going door to door, what you heard all the time from your constituents was jobs, that
right.
was the number one issue.
Right.
And I have heard about personhood, contraception, voter ID, all kinds of things. I haven't heard jobs.
Right. Well, I look back at the 2012 session. I think the only sector of the economy that can absolutely claim they gained jobs was ultrasound technicians. Okay.
True.
So I mean, if you're an ultrasound technician, you're in great shape.
Right.
The rest of us, not so much. You know, as Bettina, we could spend all day on this. Obviously, social issues dominated the attention. They dominated a lot of our time. They took up too much of our time. In terms of creating jobs, creating employment, we did have some legislation that we focused on. I had a bill, I believe it was Senate Bill 627, in which I looked at ways that we could take federal contracting in Northern Virginia, which is about a $40 billion a year business, and look at the subcontracts that we spin off out of our Northern Virginia general contractors and try and keep those with in-state small businesses, particularly small minority-owned, women-owned businesses, particularly in downstate depressed areas, which are hub zones or enterprise zones. And that was a bill that I passed. It passed the state Senate. We needed to get it funded in the budget. Unlikely to do so this year, but I thought at least it was a bill to try and say, hey, we've got a big industry in federal contracting. How do we use that to spin off business for smaller businesses? But you know what? Those bills and those ideas, they got a minority of the attention. You know, I just felt like this year so much focus was spent on once people had power, groups rushed forward that were like, wow, this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and now I want to get my bill passed. And I felt like that really dominated a lot of the time.
Was there any real notion? I knew Governor McDonnell made again a very lovely speech at the beginning saying, don't overreach, be reasonable with each other. But it didn't seem to me that anybody actually took any of that seriously, that it was just a straight rush to get the power,
right,
make the changes.
You know what? I don't know if Bob McDonnell's going to watch this program, but I hope he does, because he was in a unique opportunity both before the session began and in the first few days to sit down with the leadership of both sides and said, you know what? We're going to be together for the next 2 years. You guys are going to be together for the next 4 years. You need to work something out. Mm-hmm. He said, pick a few committees or pick a few members, or each side make a sacrifice. But instead, he stood on the sidelines and said a bunch of words. Oh, don't overreach. Well, of course they overreached.
Right.
He didn't do anything to stop them. And it's funny, I mean, as Democrats, when we step forward and, do things or sort of exact our parliamentary maneuvers or kill the state budget, then suddenly he jumps in and criticizes us. Well, let me tell you, Governor, you're going to do it both ways or don't do it at all. Okay? You want to have any credibility in this business, then criticize both sides. Right. Don't just come down on one side. Because I felt he was in a unique place to sort of say, listen, both sides are going to have to compromise, and the folks on the fringes, they're going to be mad at me. But you know what? That's what politics is all about. I mean, people get mad at you sometimes. I mean, they get mad at me sometimes. So I felt like that was an opportunity missed, and I didn't speak with the governor directly, but if I had, I would have told him the same thing I'm saying right now.
Well, a lost opportunity again. Let's talk about some other things that I know you mentioned it earlier, this cost to compete. Now, that's basically, is that like it's a wage differential? Is that what that comes down to?
What happens is the state funds education all over the Commonwealth. And they do through a very complicated formula called the Local Composite Index, the LCI. And once the money goes through the LCI, it's then distributed to all the counties in Virginia. So Fairfax County Public Schools gets about $500 to $550 million from the state. Now, they fund what they call the basic standards of quality. And the standards of quality are sort of the baseline educational, this many credits in English, this many credits in math, this many instructional personnel. And they treat every county the same in Virginia, with one exception, and that is in Northern Virginia, which is to say Planning District 8, Fairfax, Prince William, Lawton, Alexandria, Arlington, and some other counties around. They will actually give us credit for the fact we have higher costs, particularly for hiring people. I mean, if you hire an instructional aide in Fairfax County, it's going to be double what it costs down in Lee County or Mecklenburg County, at least double. And while it's not a major, they don't give us as much credit as we'd like, but that's still a significant sum of money. It's about $64 million, of which about half will go to Fairfax. And so that $30 million, that's a lot of money. That's enough to, like I said before, that will subsidize, freshman sports and elementary school band and strings and a lot of programs that are important. So, the Governor McDonnell had taken that money out of the budget as a cost savings measure, and I will say the Northern Virginia delegation as a group said, no, we got to fight to put that back.
So that's not in the budget at all at this point?
It's in partially right now. It's in partially, and obviously we'd like to see it fully funded.
Well, I would suggest to Governor McDonnell, if he thinks he's running nationally and would like votes in Northern Virginia, he better give us our money back.
Come on, Governor, put it back.
You start affecting people's children, and this is really not a good thing. And it seems that that's not great. Now, let me ask you as well about this sustainable platform for transportation funding, which you said is one of your big things.
Right.
And when you were here the last time, we talked about rapid bus transit that you wanted to do. And you said it was going to be a multi-year process. Did it make any progress this year, or did that all get lost?
No, we're moving forward. I've actually had multiple meetings with Thelma Drake, who is the former member of the House of Delegates, former Congresswoman, and now the head of the Department of Rail and Transit. And I've met with the person that does the private public partnerships for Virginia. And what we've talked about is, once we've kind of gone through the EPA studies that you need to do for any major transit project, about putting out what we call an RFP, a request for proposals, and have people actually pitch a project to us saying that they would handle the construction costs, the operation and maintenance, and basically pitch this system to us. And again, a couple of years ago, I really got everybody on board who represents the 66 corridor to say, you know what, we're not going to wait 20 more years for the Orange Line to be extended. We need to have a solution now. And we've been pushing rapid bus. And I do think with the McDonnell administration, they've been receptive to that. So what I'm hoping to do is get an RFP out there sometime in 2012, and hopefully the private market will respond and bring some bids to the table.
Well, what else can we do on transportation? Because it seems like there's no money. There was some, I read someplace, someone tried to do a really small increase in the gas tax. Did that actually pass, or did that go down in flames?
Well, yeah, I mean, maybe I need a blindfold and a cigarette, because I actually put in a bill to index the gas tax. I do every year, and it's probably not the most propitious time, but you know what? You never know when the propitious time is. It's kind of like having kids. You never know where you're going to be a year from now.
That's right.
So you just do it. And in this situation, I put in the same bill every year to index the gas tax, which is to say, look at the vehicle miles traveled, look at the gallons purchased, and as vehicle mile traveled increases and gallons purchased decreases, because people buy less gas, they have more fuel-efficient cars, then you need to take that coefficient, take that number, multiply it by the current rate, and increase the rate in order to bring in the same constant amount of dollars. So that's just to keep constant money at the table. And we've never done that, and as a result, we've lost literally billions in revenue over the past 10 years. I had the same bill again in this year. It passed the Senate. It was part of a larger bill, and then in the House it came back where they didn't have any new money, no indexing, no gas tax increase, but they did have a bill where you could, I guess, put your name on a bridge or put your name on a highway, and somehow that type of sponsorship branding is going to bring money in. I mean, that to me is farcical. You know, what are you going to brand I-495? Are you going to brand I-66? It's farcical.
Right.
But as a result, we didn't get any significant new money. Now, there have been some tolling bills kicking around to toll either some tunnel improvements down in Hampton Roads. We've talked about tolling on the 95 corridor. But I'll tell you, Bettina, by and large, transportation fund has been a failure in this state for the past 10 years.
Well, we hear the music, so we know we're going to our halftime break, and so I want to tell everyone to stay with us, because we will be back with Senator Chap Petersen. We're going to talk some more about transportation and some other interesting stuff.
Too many women get hit by their boyfriends and husbands. Too many women are pressured into having unprotected sex. Half of the people in the world living with AIDS are women. It doesn't have to be this way. Together, we can change this reality. Let's strive for a world free of violence.
At Volunteers of America, we don't just give kids a way to stay off the streets. We give them the tools they need to reach their full potential. We don't just help the elderly receive needed care. We help them live life to the fullest. We don't just provide food for homeless individuals and families. We provide job training and placement so they can buy groceries. Volunteers of America is a national organization that for over 100 years has provided programs and services that allow people to overcome their challenges to become vital members of their community. At Volunteers of America, we don't just help people, we help people help themselves. Find out how you can support the programs that are working in your community. Contact Volunteers of America today. Call 1-800-899-0089.
Drivers face all kinds of distractions.
Guys, stop playing. No. 127 consecutive.
Before your wireless phone becomes one of them, stop. Drive safely. Keep your phone in easy reach and dial sensibly. In bad weather or traffic, call later and use a hands-free device. Remember, with wireless, safety is your call.
Here again, the Inside Scoop, Virginia.
Welcome back. I'm Bettina Lawton. With me is Senator Chap Petersen. And when we went to the break, we were talking about transportation. So I want to continue that because I didn't get a great sense of anything coming out. I mean, what are the plans? And perhaps it's just because I'm in Northern Virginia and I'm sitting in this traffic that I keep thinking somebody must have some idea. Is there any idea out there? We're not going to raise gasoline tax, apparently. We're not going to do other things. I mean, how do you toll without building the facilities? Where does that money come from for, flying through with your Easy Pass? There's still expenditures involved in that.
No, Bettina, I think I used to use the word failure as we went to break. It's really been a failure. There are other ways to finance highways. For example, you talked about tolls. I mean, theoretically, if we had tolls on certain highways, we could use that to create revenue. The Dulles Toll Road, that's pretty much financing what's going to happen with the rail. And in fact, that's been an issue in Northern Virginia. We've asked the governor to give more state support so we can actually buy down the tolls so the tolls won't be as high. And that's a whole other discussion. Another thing that you can do is a tax increments financing district where if you have landowners that are going to benefit from a road or a rail system, you can actually put an extra increment on their real property taxes and use that to finance. We call that tax increments financing. And that may be what we do in the 66 corridor. But leave all that aside and just focus on operations and maintenance. Just simply maintaining the roads is a multi-billion-dollar proposition in Virginia, and we don't have that money right now. And that's what I'm telling people. I'm not talking about new construction. I'm talking about mowing the right-of-ways. I'm talking about repaving. I'm talking about filling potholes, that type of money.
Well, is that why they're trying to do this, turn the roads over to local governments? There's some phrase for it that isn't coming to mind.
Devolution.
Devolution.
Yeah,
that's
which
right.
is
that what
not
that's
not to be confused with evolution. Devolution has not been proven.
Okay.
But devolution would involve taking the highways and turning them back to the counties. The counties originally controlled roads in Virginia up and through about the 1920s, actually the early 30s, and then during the Great Depression, Virginia actually took control of all the highways because a lot of the counties were defaulting on their bonds. And since that time, Virginia has run the highway system, and we've had a very good highway system. And we have a centralized, authority with VDOT, and there's certain economies of scale when you have, one vendor that's handling the maintenance and handling sort of all the maintenance and just all the responsibilities. So if we went to devolution, then you'd have to create, basically 100 mini VDOTs, and there's a lot of inefficiencies there. Now, the larger counties like Fairfax, they could probably do it. The smaller counties certainly could not.
But how do they fund it? If you were to put in Fairfax's hands now, their roads, a lot of the roads in Fairfax are not in great shape.
Right.
So I assume there would have to be some initial, the state doesn't have any money. They can't give it to us.
Right.
And then the only taxing authority that Fairfax County has is real estate.
Right, and then they get a small portion of the sales tax. But you're right. I mean, what would have to happen is whatever locality that chooses to take back control of its roads, and I'm not endorsing this, okay, but if they did, then theoretically they would have to have that percentage of, let's say, titling tax or gas tax or what other aspect of transportation revenue comes out of their jurisdiction, which would be it would be a windfall for those jurisdictions located along 95 or 81 because they get most of the gas tax revenue. For the rest of us, people living in the suburbs, we probably would not get the fair share that we would want. So, at the end of the day, it's better to have VDOT control the system. Again, you don't have 100 and 125 different mini VDOTs out there. But we got to fund VDOT, and that's our big issue.
Yeah, I'm not hearing any solutions coming, really.
Yeah, I mean, again, I've said it once, I've said it before. I mean, we've got to increase the gas tax. It's still 17.5 cents per gallon, which is what it was back in 1986. Cars are more fuel efficient. They use less gas. And so that purchasing power is now down to about 7 cents on the gallon. So it's just been totally devastated. The other main revenue driver is the 3% titling tax on new vehicle sales. But as you are probably aware, vehicles last longer than they used to. So people don't buy them as often. Or more likely they lease them. So that revenue has kind of gone down the drain. So as a result, we have a fraction of what we used to have. And either we've got to raise those existing taxes, or what we could do is raise the sales tax and take a larger percentage of that dedicated to transportation. I'm not crazy about that because, to be honest, sales tax is paid by Virginians by and large, while our gas tax, a third of it comes from out of state. So I'm like, hey, I'm not here to give a free ride to people from New Jersey. That's not my job. So, again, I just keep coming back to that fact. But, you know.
Let me ask you about something else that you mentioned about buying down the toll increases on the Dulles Toll Road and then the Hampton Roads tunnel.
Yep.
Is there precedent for that? I mean, why would the state do that? Why would they? Isn't that unfair to everybody else in the rest of the state?
Well, normally that type of project, let's say it's building, the Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel or a major project like that, the state would have kicked in a major share. For example, the Hot Lanes, the state kicked in a share. Woodrow Wilson Bridge, the state kicked in a share. Dulles Toll Road, the state hasn't done anything. All it's done is the toll road users have paid, and the state has considered that their share. But the state hasn't put in any money. So as a result, those tolls are going to keep increasing and be artificially high. And so when we say buy down the tolls, that's a colloquialism. What we really mean is we want the state to contribute to what is a very large public works project, as they traditionally did.
Okay.
And the same thing applies for Hampton Roads.
Okay. All right. I didn't understand how that.
Yeah, that's what I mean by buy down the tolls. That's kind of a.
Now you had something when you were here in October that you talked about. It had to do with energy efficient buildings.
Yes.
You got that passed.
That passed.
You rebranded
Hallelujah.
what you were doing, right?
Can I tell you how it happened?
Yes, I want to know.
Well, for 4 years, I put in the same bill called the Green Buildings Act. And it basically would require that all of our new state buildings would have to be built according to LEED certified standards or equivalent standards. And they would be certified as green buildings, and therefore they would save us money for more efficiency with water and electricity and everything else. Great idea. Should have done it years ago. And I would put the bill in, and it would pass, and then it would die. It would pass the Senate and then die in the House. Mm-hmm. And I just couldn't figure it out. And finally I said, this year I'm going to do something different. So I changed the title from the green buildings to cost-effective buildings. I was actually going to change it to patriotic buildings, but I said no.
A little over the line.
That would be too obvious. So I changed it to cost-effective buildings, and it got through the Senate, and it passed the House unanimously.
Unanimously?
And
that was fabulous.
And to be honest, I'm going to tip my hat to Chris Jones, who's a delegate Republican from Suffolk. He ended up carrying a companion bill, and basically I took care of his bill on the Senate side. He took care of my bill on the House side. So, but we got the bill passed. It'll hopefully be signed by the. Don't veto it, Governor. Don't take too personally what I said earlier. So, but if he signs it, it'll be the state law. So I'm proud of that. It took years to get that.
That's pretty funny. It's sort of a change in the name, a little different focus.
Shook it up a little bit.
But, when you're looking for money and you got a bill that says cost-effective buildings, it all works out.
Right.
Let's talk about this teacher tenure bill. Now, that got defeated, and that was Governor McDonald's big thing. And, and when you were saying he could have been a leader, he could have sat everybody down, I was thinking to myself, he couldn't get his teacher tenure bill through.
Right.
How good is he at this stuff?
Right. Well, that was a bill that I to be honest, it took a lot of thought. There was a lot of opinions expressed on that. And I didn't feel like not everything in the bill was bad. I thought it's always useful to look at our system for hiring teachers and evaluating teachers. It's useful to look at it. The problem with that system was it literally, once you hired a teacher and they went through a probationary system, they were on essentially a series of one-year contracts in which they could be released or terminated at any time. And one of the things you have to remember is teachers, by and large, are paid below market prices. Okay? And that's just the reality of it. And the teachers I know, they go into the profession understanding that. But one of the flip sides of that is once they go into the profession and once they've earned their stripes, they expect to have some type of job security. And we need that in order to stay competitive. And there are ways to get rid of teachers that are not performing or that are incompetent. But to have a series of one-year contracts where you could be teaching for years and then somehow you have a personality clash with a principal, which inevitably happens, and suddenly you're released and you're out on the street, I think was a little bit of a drastic change. And again, I mean, that was one that I put a lot of thought into, but I feel like the current system works well. I have 3 kids in the elementary school system. I'm very familiar with teachers. I'm very impressed by the teachers they've had. Not all teachers are great, but principals understand that they're under the responsibility that if teachers aren't performing, they need to either bring them up to speed or else get rid of them. Mm-hmm. But I'd much rather have that be with principals and not the state legislature saying, well, you got a one-year contract. I just don't think that we can stay competitive if we're constantly just, again, having that amount of insecurity in the teaching profession.
Well, particularly with some place like Montgomery County across the river, perfectly happy to pay more.
Right.
And that really puts us at a competitive disadvantage.
And I think you've got to recognize that by and large we don't pay the same prevailing rates that they do in Montgomery County or D.C. for that matter. And again, I understand that. I mean, we're a very fiscally conservative state, but I think that by the same time you've got to have some security in the profession. Well,
and that was the thing that bothered me, and what I read about it was you could just terminate them. You didn't have to give a reason. There wasn't any process to go through to try and do it. And you can get rid of a teacher now. You just have to actually document it and go through it.
Right, you got to go through a process, and it's like anything else. And again, I come back to principals. Principals run the schools, and they have a lot of responsibility, and they have the responsibility for making sure that the level of teaching is up to a certain level. And you know, I think they do a pretty good job of getting there and making sure that the teachers are up to the performance levels.
Yeah, I was glad to see that one go. Now, let's talk about VRS.
Yes, a lot of changes this year.
A lot of changes, and as I understand it, they all happened very, very late. So, VRS is the Virginia Retirement System. Right? And it's most localities, the state government, but not police and firefighters.
They have their own programs.
They have their own programs.
That's right.
There were changes made before, as I understand it, was contribution. You now...
We changed in 2010 that everyone who entered the system after July 1, 2010 would have to start paying the employee contribution. Now, for those of you that are in the private workforce, you're probably well aware that if you have a pension plan, your employer pays a share and you pay a share. Right. What we did was we paid our employees' share. And I know we're going into break, and when we come back, I'm going to explain to you why we did that.
Okay. And then there were a lot of changes
at
the last minute in this session. So we are going to be back with Senator Chap Petersen. Stay with us for our final segment.
This is firstgov.gov, where we're obsessed with getting you government information.
Brand new student loan applications on the site, baby. This calls for a celebration. Where's your uncle?
So in the end, it was either take the astronaut gig or come work here. What can I say? Duty called.
Dude, that's my cop.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. No, I'm pretty sure that's Sam's cop.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. No. Sam's? No.
Just log on or email us and get what you need.
C, change of address form. That's how it's done.
D, driver's license renewal.
E, emailing Social Security information.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Nice, we'll allow it. All right, Ed.
What are those?
Government surplus cars for auction.
You posted those online last time.
No, you did.
I'm posting them online this time.
For all your government information, firstgov.gov.
Oh, what have we got here? Sometimes you feel tired. You can't seem to lose those extra pounds off your midsection. And your joints hurt when you take the stairs. Well, you're getting older. But I'm happy to say that there's some simple things we can do to keep you happy and healthy for years to come. We can also lower your risk for some serious diseases the older population is often subject to. Proper nutrition is more important than ever. Your body has changed, you know. Not as many treats. A basic exercise plan. Lots of walks and fresh air. And most importantly, come and see me for twice-yearly checkups to help ensure the best possible quality of life. Now, how does that sound? Good boy.
Improve the quality of life for your elderly pet. Schedule twice yearly checkups that include preventive care and regular lab work. A message from the veterinary members of the American Animal Hospital Association.
Here again, the Inside Scoop, Virginia.
Welcome back. This is our final segment with Senator Chap Petersen, at least for today. We'll have him back later.
All right.
We were talking VRS.
Yes.
So the initial change in 2010 was instead of the state paying employer and employee,
right,
new hires
had to start paying their own employee share, which is 5% of their salary. And that is historically how pension systems work, that the employer pays a share and the employee pays a share. I mean, they both have matching shares. I mean, that's typically how it worked. And years ago, the state started paying the employee share, and it was my understanding that was in lieu of giving a pay raise. And for whatever reason, they did it that way, and it's continued that way. And in 2010, we essentially unrolled that system, so now the employees after July 1, 2010 had to pay their own share. The older people before July 1, 2010 stayed in the old system because they were vested and we'd already made that.
And this
deal.
was a cost-saving measure.
And that was a cost savings because obviously now we've got private people putting money into the system, and of course they're new hires, so they can't say, "Oh, you're changing the rules on me." I mean,
exactly.
These are the rules. You're going to work here. These are the rules. July 1, 2012. We're going to make actually July 1, 2014. So 4 years from that, we're going to have another change. And the newest change is basically going to revise a number of things, including what we call the multiplier, which is the actual amount people collect on the back end. It's also going to change the number of the way that the pension payment is calculated. Right now, you take what they call the high three. Mm-hmm. So your three highest earning years, those are averaged together, and then a percentage of that, based on how many years you worked, is what you're paid as your pension. Starting after 2014, it will be what's called the high five. So it'll, to some extent, lower the amount that they're paid. The cost of living adjustment will go down somewhat. So there will be changes for those folks joining after July 1, 2014. Everyone before July 1, 2010 stays the same. Everyone who was hired after July 1, 2010 and before July 1, 2014 will stay the same. And then after July 1, 2014, you'll have a change. Now, besides those benefits being reduced, we're also going to have for the first time what they call a hybrid system. And the hybrid system is of the portion that you receive, a portion will be based on what they call defined benefit, which is what your expectation is, and then a portion will be defined contribution. And so that you will pay, I believe it's going to start at 1% of the 5%. It's going to work its way up, but of the employee contribution will be a hybrid between defined benefit and defined contribution. And that's essentially going to be on a sliding scale that's going to work in. And again, it's only for the new employees after July 1, 2014.
Now, the defined contribution, as I understand this, and I'm not sure I do,
yeah,
is so I know that I have to contribute $100.
Right.
But what I get out at the end, that's going to be determined by what? I determine investments? Is this going to be like a 401k?
Well,
where
it will be like any other 401k where you can choose sort of the portfolio that you want to invest in. If you want to go high risk, you want to go medium risk. I mean, I think to start with, we're going to try and encourage people that do invest in this to try and take, obviously, the most conservative position. But at the end of the day, if it's defined contribution, they have the right to invest and do whatever they want.
So you're really transferring some of the risk over to the employees as opposed to the current system where the
current system, you know what you're getting out at the end. And I think people are probably watching saying, well, why change the current system? Because it's $20 billion underfunded. And that's not because of some wild mismanagement on the state's part. It's simply because people are living longer. Mm-hmm. And the biggest problem we have, it's not a problem, is that state employees oftentimes are living into their 80s and 90s. And to make this kind of the most real, our police and firefighters, those pension systems are actually about even right now. They're flat. They're not underfunded. The teachers is about $12 billion underfunded. And the reason is, and I'll just be blunt, it's because police and firefighters tend to be men, and they die younger. Teachers tend to be women, live longer. And so that's why those pension systems, one of them's upside down. And so we've got to adjust for this so people can still have a pension system, or else there's not going to be one in 10 years. Okay. So anyways, those are some of the internal dynamics We passed that plan in the Senate, I believe, on a vote of 34-6. But we had a lot of debate about it, and there's a lot of different aspects to it.
Okay, so people really need to understand what they're getting into.
If you're a state employee, again, if you were already vested, nothing's changed. But if you're thinking about taking a job with the state after July 1, 2014, read the fine print because there's going to be some changes.
Okay. Let's talk about voter ID.
Yes.
Well, voter ID bill passed. There were a lot of changes in it. Initially, as I understand it, it started out you had to have some kind of a photo ID, and now it's switched off of that.
You can bring pretty much a water bill. You can bring a college ID. And by the way, I voted against the bill, so I'm not explaining it because I support it. I'm just explaining it that if people are confused, if you don't have a driver's license, pretty much any form of ID will work. Or I believe if you can also bring in some type of utility bill that has your name and your address, so that can get matched up. I voted against all these bills, Bettina. I don't. First of all, I don't think there's a problem. I don't see people rushing forward to commit a felony by voting falsely. And secondly, I think right now you have people that come in. They may lose their wallet. They may leave it in the car. They've been waiting in line. They may have a child with them. And if they're willing to sign an affidavit that says, you know, I'm John Q. Smith. I live at 10100 Main Street, and particularly nobody else. That person, that name is in the polling book and no one else has voted. Again, to me, there's not a problem to solve. And we've historically allowed people to vote based on affidavit. Of course, we didn't even have driver's license till about 50 years ago. So, you know, before that time, it was obviously done by affidavit. So I felt like it was a solution in search of a problem. But having said that, yes, you can bring in multiple forms of ID.
But if you come in with nothing, I mean, at my polling place, I've had some people who they go out for their morning jog, and on their way back, they stop in to vote.
Right.
They don't have a thing. They get to vote those provisional green ballots.
Right. They will vote what's called a provisional ballot. And here's the part that I find to be insidious is that they'll vote a provisional ballot, but that provisional ballot won't count unless they come back again with the ID to prove that they are who they are. So they've got to make a second trip in order to prove they are who they are.
And do they have like a certain time frame within which they've got to show back up, or they've got to send it into the registrar? Or
I think it's 24 hours. Jeez. And, you know, it's funny. You never think it's going to make a difference, but then, of course, we all know what happened in Florida in 2000. Or in Virginia with Deeds versus McDonald in 2005 was decided by 300 votes.
Right.
Well, I'll guarantee you probably at least 5,000, maybe 10,000 were cast by affidavit that year.
And so there's no actual demonstration of a problem in Virginia.
You know what? I've been in elections for 20 years. I've never heard of somebody falsely claiming to be somebody they're not in order to cast a vote. And I've been on the ballot many times, and I've had people that supported me, but I've never met someone who was willing to be a felon in order to see me get elected. I mean, to use the old Humphrey Bogart line, nobody ever loved me that much. So I don't quite know what they're talking about, but...
Well, I did find it interesting when I read the final version of it that you also can vote a regular ballot if an election officer says you are who you are. And I thought that was very strange.
Right. Well, that was another one of the changes that was made, where if you walk in, and for example, I voted John C. Wood Elementary, where I went to, well, it's now the police station. I went to elementary school there. I know every single person that works there. And if I came in and said, I'm Chap Petersen, and they go, no, I'm not my dad, but they recognize me and say, oh, yeah, you're Chap, and go ahead and vote. Well, yeah, legally I could vote because they can verify who I am.
Right.
But, of course, that gives an advantage to me that a new voter would not have. So
that's right. Yet
another reason not to support that bill.
Okay. Well, let's talk and about the personhood bill. Which did you vote for that one?
Well, we voted to send it back to committee. That bill had come out of the House and came to the Senate, and the word on the street had been that the governor's administrative staff did not want to see it pass. It had all sorts of issues in it, one of which is if your wife was pregnant, could you declare that as a dependent on your tax return? Or could you then get on I-66 and say it was, yes, HOV. Yes. I mean, there was all sorts of ramifications. The governor did not want to see it pass, but someone forgot to get the news down to the Education and Health Committee, who passed it to committee, so it came onto the floor, and they had an emergency calendar. Usually it takes 3 days before you take a bill up when it passes committee. And I asked one of the Republicans in our debate, I said, why is this an emergency item? We were 2 weeks away from adjournment. And they just said, well, it's considered a pressing issue, and they voted to then send it back to committee. So they were very nervous. They were very nervous about that. And again, you know, I don't, trust me, I don't want to disrespect anybody who has strong opinions on this issue, the issue of life and abortion. And there's a lot to talk about, but the way that bill was written, it would have led to some absurd results. That, you know, if you want to treat a fetus as a child, there's all sorts of situations where a person qualifies for benefits that it would just wouldn't make any sense. So, anyways, yeah.
Well, we all sort of watched that and thought, good Lord, you know, it didn't pass in Mississippi, and if Virginia does it, I mean, and I suppose that's a terrible thing, and anybody out there who's from Mississippi, I apologize. But
I love Mississippi; it's a beautiful state.
But it was one of those bills that, as I looked at it, I said, this is such mischief. This is not a good thing.
Well, it was funny because after they had a hearing on that personhood bill, and a lot of people came to oppose it, and a lot of people came to support it, and afterwards they were having an interview with Bob Marshall, who was a sponsor, and there were people chanting negative things about him, and there were dozens of people. And at one point, the state police or the Capitol Police were trying to haul people off, and I turned to somebody next to me and I said, you know, this place actually got interesting. For the first time in several years. I feel like I'm in the middle of something. It was like Berkeley in '66 or something, you know. So...
Yeah, there was a lot of state police action down in Richmond this year.
That
was not a good situation.
Yeah, I was disappointed. You know, part of being in politics is you recognize you're in politics, and people have a right to protest and to congratulate you, and by and large just to come in and state their opinions. And that to me is what the state capitol is all about. We have a 6 or 8 acre campus there, and there's a lot of room for people to come in and wave the flag, and I'm excited when people do it. It doesn't matter what their issue is. So we had a lot of protests this year. I felt like in some cases we overreacted, but we're going to save that, I guess, for next week's show.
Yeah, we will do that. I do want to thank you for coming tonight.
Thank you, Bettina.
And being on the show. I want to encourage everybody to go to your FairfaxSenator.com website. You have a fabulous Ox Road South that you write. It's very amusing, very well written, so please sign up for it and check it out. Stay with us for next week.